Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really critical moment in India's fight for freedom, a time when the movement itself was split right down the middle. It was a clash of ideas, a battle of strategies that would go on to shape the entire nation's destiny. So, think about it. In the late 19th century, this was the question facing Indian nationalists. The British Empire was arguably at the peak of its power. How do you even begin to confront something that massive? Well, it turns out they came up with two very, very different answers. On one side, you had a group that believed the best way forward was to work within the British system. Use petitions, have dialogues, and argue for more rights. But on the other side, a new group was rising up saying, no, the system itself is the problem. It has to be challenged head on. And this wasn't just a minor disagreement. It was a fundamental clash that split the Indian National Congress into two camps, the moderates and the extremists. Okay, so let's start with the first wave, the original architects of the movement, the moderates. For a solid 2 decades, from 1885 all the way to 1905, these guys were the undisputed leaders of the Indian National Congress. They were the ones who first charted the path. So who were these moderates? Well, for the most part, they were Western-educated intellectuals. Think lawyers, professors, and other professionals. Leaders like the great Dadabhai Naoroji and Gopal Krishna Gokhale, they genuinely believed that if they just presented their case logically, the famous British sense of justice and fair play would eventually win out. Their entire method revolved around what they called the 3 Ps: prayers, petitions, and protests, all totally within the bounds of the law. But don't think they were just writing polite letters. Their greatest weapon was intellectual. Dadabhai Naoroji's drain of wealth theory was an absolute bombshell. Using hard economic data, he proved that Britain wasn't some benevolent ruler. It was acting like an economic parasite, just systematically siphoning India's resources away. This was a complete game changer because it laid bare the true cost of colonialism for everyone to see. But here's the thing. Intellectual arguments can only take you so far. After 20 years of petitioning, with very little real change to show for it, people's patience was really starting to wear thin. A storm was brewing, and a few key events would soon show everyone the limits of the moderate approach. First, you had these absolutely devastating famines and plagues in the late 1890s, and the government's response just seemed, indifferent to the massive suffering. Then this guy Lord Curzon becomes viceroy, and he starts rolling back freedoms and tightening British control over things like universities. But the final straw, the real tipping point, was the 1905 partition of Bengal. Everyone saw it for what it was, a blatant attempt to divide and rule by splitting Hindus and Muslims. And that lit a fire under the entire nationalist movement. So all this frustration, it had to go somewhere. And it did. It boiled over and gave rise to a new, fiery, and much more assertive generation of leaders, the extremists. They were completely done asking politely. They had a radically different vision for what India's future should be. And the voice of this new guard, more than anyone, was Bal Gangadhar Tilak. See, he had zero faith in British promises or their sense of justice. He used his powerful newspapers, the Khizri and Maratha, not to write polite letters, but as a call to arms. They were designed to awaken the masses and get them ready for a real fight. And this, right here, is the crucial difference. The extremists changed the entire goal. They weren't asking for a few more seats at the colonial table anymore. As Tilak's famous quote makes crystal clear, they wanted Swaraj, complete self-rule. This wasn't a request for reform. It was a demand for total freedom. And their methods were just as radical as their goal. Forget petitions. They launched this powerful 4-point program built on direct action. First, boycott all British goods. Second, promote Indian-made goods, or Swadeshi. Third, build a national education system free from British influence. And finally, use passive resistance to make it impossible for the British to govern. You just can't keep two completely opposite ideologies in the same party forever. Something had to give, and it did. The tension finally exploded at the 1907 Congress session in Surat. The whole thing descended into chaos, ending with a historic split that formally broke the Indian National Congress into 2 separate, opposing camps. Let's just break it down side by side. The moderates' goal? Self-government, but still within the British Empire. For the extremists? No way. Nothing less than Swaraj, complete independence. Their methods? constitutional appeals versus direct action like boycotts, and at the heart of it all was their attitude. The moderates held on to a faith in British justice, while the extremists had absolutely no faith in British intentions. Okay, if you need an easy way to remember the difference, here's a great little mnemonic from our source material. Just think of the moderates as calm. They used constitutional methods, they appealed to the British, they remained largely loyal, and they sought moderate reforms. The extremists, on the other hand, waged war. They wanted Swaraj, they used agitation, and they wanted to reject the British system entirely. So after all that, what's the big takeaway? What should we make of this clash of ideas that really defined an entire era of the freedom struggle? Well, when you look back, it's clear that both groups played an absolutely indispensable role. You can think of it like this. The moderates laid the foundation. Their economic critiques and their work in building political institutions, that was the crucial groundwork. But it was the extremists who took that foundation and built the movement upon it, taking nationalism out of the meeting rooms and into the streets, turning it into a real mass movement for the very first time. And this all leaves us with a really big, lingering question. Was this clash of ideologies, this internal battle, the necessary spark that actually propelled India towards freedom? Or was it a tragic division that played right into the hands of the British and their age-old strategy of divide and rule? It's a debate that, honestly, continues to this day.